What we're going to do is we're going to work with your brains today. Every human being has a brain, and it's the only one you get. Why not treat it right? We do this on Valentine's Day very rarely, and both of us told our wives that you've got to know that this is going to be a one-of-a-kind event, that we're going to be back tomorrow. We fly out of here at 6 in the morning, we're early. But we wanted to ask you a couple of things. How many people have a feeling that this is one of those perfect days? Raise your hand.
All right.
For what? For coming to this event, for one thing. I asked a few people, are you here for the chocolate or for the brain health? And it was a mixed bag. You're going to get them both because you're going to taste some of the elixir that's been prepared this morning by the Concordia team. So get ready. But I'm going to change this question. How many say that this is a perfect day to start a love affair?
Yeah.
When I told my wife I was going to ask the group, she said, how are you going to answer it?
Yeah, right.
I said, wait a second, that slide isn't complete. Here's the question of the day. Isn't this a perfect day to start a love affair with your own brain? Nobody will be against that, because if you can understand that you need to treat your brain right, it will pay you back. It'll pay you back for the rest of your life. So the love affair we're going to talk about is one that Michael's going to lead you through why we chose 3 things for today. And those 3 things are the keys to understanding just a few things you can do when you do fall in love with your brain. Michael?
Yeah, when you think about it, your brain has done an awful lot for you, probably over the years. It's been with you for a long time. It goes about its business, does good things for you. Are you really treating your brain as well as you should be? So what we're going to suggest is we're going to show you some of the ways that you can treat your brain nicely, the way you would treat a new love affair. Bring it some flowers, some chocolate, and some affection. We wanted to say, when we talk about the brain, we just wanted to sort of explain some of the wording. Whenever we talk about the brain, we're also including the body. The brain can't work without a body. The body can't work without the brain. So even though we're not going to say body and brain all the time, we mean that. And also, there's a difference between the brain and the mind, and we'll talk about both those. The brain is essentially the hardware. It's like the hardware of your computer. The mind is more the software. It's if the brain part is the structure, the mind is the function. It's what your brain does. So it's the emotions, it's the behavior, and so on. So we'll talk about, we should be saying body, brain, and mind all the time, but we'll end up saying brain, usually just for the sake of what we're doing. So I said, today we're going to go through these 3 things that you can do to sort of woo your brain and give it the kind of nurturing that it should have. We're going to talk about chocolate, and chocolate will represent all food, and meaning you need to know what you're doing with your diet in order to keep your brain healthy. Affection is going to represent social engagement and relationships with people, which there's a lot of robust research saying that that's incredibly important for your brain health. And thirdly, flowers. You always want to give flowers to your loved one. Well, that's going to represent nature and the environment. Okay? So we'll take it from there.
Now we have some polls that we like to take when we have a group like this. The poll is something we just ask you to quickly raise your hand. Here's the question. We used to ask, raise your hand if you want to be 100 years old. We changed that because of the new neuroscience of aging and the era of longevity. You're raising your hand already, aren't you? But when we ask our students that we teach in Portland in the college gerontology courses, we want to make sure they know that this era of longevity is not going to stop. It's only going to get better. But we need to make sure we catch up the health span, not just the lifespan of your brain, but the health span. So raise your hand if you want to be 110 years old. That's called a super centenarian. Centenarians, what do you think, Michael, 20%? 25%?
I don't know. You better know
think
better than
that's
I
it.
do.
When we're looking at that figure of 110, that's called a super centenarian. Centenarian is someone who is 100 years or more. There are so many centenarians in the U.S. that they've got cards at Hallmark for happy 100th birthday. There are approximately 72,000 is the most recent figure I've got. And that's not the most important figure. It's that so many of them are successfully aging as they define success. They're living in communities like Concordia with a goal not of extending their life, but extending their joy of life, the quality of life. So those that raised your hand, keep in mind that we may ask later on the same question. See if others might learn from us in the next hour, that they might be able to say, you know, I might want to live that long if you know how to keep your brain healthy.
It's
So
interesting, Roger. We got
Yeah.
about the same response that we normally get. It was almost 50-50. Didn't
Okay.
you think? Like 50% said, yes, I want to live to be 100. 50% said, I don't think so. So
when we
you wanna
start-
explore why it is you don't think
Michael,
so.
when we started this, it was 50% when we asked for 100. When we tried to go 110, almost nobody raised their hand because that years ago, that was thought to almost be impossible. But let's talk about our species. If we wanted to point out that one of our species aged successfully and vibrantly up to an older age, I would point out our two American champions. For men, it's Walter from Montana, lived to be, you ready, 115 years old. We could not find a picture of him without his tie and a smile on his face. There's one that I don't have time to show you of him throwing out the first pitch in a baseball game. Walter had 3 secrets, and when you get to be 100, they will ask you, what's your secret or what's your secrets plural? He had 3. Whiskey. This was wild women and a great sense of humor. Isn't that perfect?
I want to adopt those myself.
Yeah.
They're pretty good.
But this is Sarah. She is the second oldest person in the world history to be documented. She's our American champion. She lived to be, well, the picture you see is her at 99 years old. She didn't know that she had 2 decades of life left. 119. She's one of us. Could we learn, figure out what she did? Here's her 3 secrets. She loved needlepoint. Anybody quilt? Anybody still quilt? Anybody do needlepoint? Anything like that is hand-eye, body-mind coordination. Wiggle your big toe. You got it? That's part of your brain. So what she was doing with that was giving a signal, keep in touch with your body. Second, she loved golf. Anybody like to watch golf on TV? It's good for your brain because Sarah watched it every weekend. Things change. She had her favorites, but the third one fits for perfect Valentine's signal. Her third secret was chocolate turtles. You know, the kind her doctor said she ate 2 chocolate turtles a day, one in the afternoon and one in the evening. She savored every bite. That's the signal. But here's the champion. This is the all-time champion, Madame Jeanne Calment from France. She lived a robust life in the same city. She had friends that she would ride a bicycle around town and stop and visit and have a cup of coffee and she went around that route until she was 100. And then it became no longer safe, but she loved the socialization. She bought a walking stick and walked the same route. She was always, as they said, walking, walking, walking. That gets more blood flow to her brain. She then, do you have a question? Okay, we're going to save questions unless...
No, this is really important.
Okay, I believe you.
The secret to the man's long life was wild women. So when we get to the women, why isn't it wild men?
I love that. If you didn't hear her, she said, if the wild women were good for Walter,
Yeah.
why isn't the wild man good for the women?
Good point. Right.
Oh. Let's at least call them endangered species. But that was excellent. This young lady had no idea how old she would become, but she acted as though she was going to be living life to the fullest. She did things that people then, as they studied her, that we could adopt because she's our species. She had secrets. When she turned 113, 114, she was discovered by the world. Guinness's Book of World Records came in. Reporters came in. One of her secrets was, I don't worry about things I can't control. Well, that's perfect. Another secret was, the Lord only gave me one wrinkle, and I don't worry about it because I'm sitting on it. One reporter said at her 117th birthday, is there anything you haven't done that you'd like to do? And she snapped back with a smile and said, I'd like to go to the moon. Could you arrange that? But when she passed away at 122 and a half years, we saw not a dead end, a dead line. That's not the limit of aging for the future. That's the limit so far, and she's one of our species. But she also did some of the correct things like socializing. But one of her secrets that I'll embrace for Valentine's Day is that she said one of her secrets was chocolate. Seriously, chocolate. She said, I eat dark chocolate. And they found out she ate 1 kilo a week. You know what 1 kilo is? Almost 2 pounds. But she didn't eat it on a Wednesday or a Saturday. She ate pieces this big. So the sip of the elixir you're going to get, the Aztec chocolate today, is about what she would have a little bit in the morning, a little bit later in the morning. She'd have pieces of chocolate. We now know after she died at how old? 122 and a half, that she was doing the right things to open up the blood vessels, to help her heart. So she's our icon of aging. Someone who, in this picture, those two girls will always remember having that photo taken with the oldest person ever to be documented. And the stats are that if these two do the right things, 1 out of the 2 will be over 100 or even 110. But in her hands is a piece of chocolate I found. And that's the size that she always ate. So, Michael, I think what we want to do is to go into the blue zones, and then I'm going to call you up here.
Yeah, go ahead.
But these could be determined to be outliers. These are our species, but nobody could do that. Well, Dan Buettner went around the globe for National Geographic to find the places on Earth that had the most oak trees like us, the most older people. First place he went to was Russia, Georgia, the part of Russia. Of course, that's the oldest place. They didn't qualify because they were all fudging on their driver's license. They weren't as old as they claimed to be, but in their society, you got honored if you're older. He wanted statistics and data that were scientifically validated. He got them on these 5 places on Earth. They found 5 zones. They called them the blue zones, where people as a cluster somehow not just went to 100, but went beyond 100, and they were successfully aging. What he did was to take what do you do in Italy, and what do you do in Japan, and what do you do in the other places, including one in America at Loma Linda, and figure out, do they all do similar things? Plant-based diets. Some meat, some fish, but primarily plant-based. They walked places. They did things that were unintentional exercise. They stimulated their brain by going to events and doing things like they do at Concordia that get your mind actually moving. They socialized, which is really important. They didn't isolate. They were with other people. They loved music and dancing. Loma Linda didn't do one thing that they did, and that is they all socialized, all 4 of them socialized with either sake or a small glass of wine, and studies have shown that 1 glass of something is better than none, but it's also better than 2 or 3 or 4. But it really may not be the alcohol, but it's the socialization. And the Loma Lindas, is the center of a lot of Seventh-day Adventists. They happen to live in that town. But they also drank red and purple juices. There's your antioxidant equivalent. So blue zones informs us that you can inject into other places. What we learned with the blue zones, that our species have thrived into their hundreds and 110s. They started with Minnesota, and now there are 9 places in the U.S. that the Blue Zone Project is actually going in and taking the town leaders and the grocery stores and the parks and rec and all the schools to educate them. Knowledge. Michael and I don't sell anything except knowledge. As long as you understand that the pill will never get here in your lifetime, that's the prediction. But if you can get the knowledge, it is power for you to say, I'm going to apply that knowledge. That's what they did. And they went to places, including one right in your state. Shawnee is one of the 9 places in America that qualified as a community to say, we want to be a Blue Zone. And Dan Buettner and his team said, nope, the Blue Zone Project requires all these pledges to buy into this. Because if we teach your people how to eat right and how to walk, and you don't have walking paths built before they get the knowledge, and if you don't have grocery stores that have what they're going to come to want to make their brains and bodies healthy, it won't work. They qualified. So we're going to be watching whether or not the folks over in Potawatomi, did I do it? Yes! Because it's county-wide, it's a model for 2 of the 9 are states. The entire, Oregon, where I'm from, and Hawaii said, we're not going to do this in a community or a county, we're going to do this statewide. So the goal is that follow what they're doing. Perhaps this community right now could qualify, but we're not looking at trying to qualify communities. We're looking at people to have that momentum and motivation to say, why not Oklahoma City? Why not say, let's educate the whole city? So that's a model that we love to point out. And this is the book that Michael and I had to write because there were no books that translated neuroscience into plain English that we could use for our college class. So we invented a way that we could have our students not only get the book, but they could then share it. We said, we have a cell phone. Turn off your cell phones. But there was one time that somebody had a cell phone and it was ringing. She couldn't get it shut off. I answered it and talked to the guy for a second and just said, yeah, I'll tell her. Set it down, and I said, it was George Clooney. And they were recording anyway. So, Michael, you want to go ahead and take this over?
Yeah.
We're going to explain why we had to write our book and what these 6 cogwheels. Don't use your pencils and write them down. You've got that in your handouts.
That's right. You got a handout here with the 8 cogwheels. We started with 6, but now we have 8. Apparently, when we are near each other, we can create feedback. So, back off. Oh, okay. Oh, that's what I should have done. Yeah. The 8 cogwheels, we were happy to see that the blue zones, the conditions that Buettner found in these blue zones were very similar to what we were finding in the research as we were pulling in all of the research on what you can do to keep yourself healthy and happy as you age. You'll notice that this is all pretty much behavioral. These are behavioral activities. These are lifestyle choices. And none of this should be surprising to you. But they are... We call them cogwheels because they are cognitive wheels and they're like gears, cogs. They all work together. You have to have all of these working pretty well in order for you to put yourself in the optimum position. You'll all recognize, like, I probably didn't get enough sleep last night, but we've all experienced when you don't get enough sleep, your brain feels a little foggy almost immediately. Well, that's if you're not getting enough sleep on a regular basis, it can affect your brain. And you get foggy, and it can have long-term effects. Each one of these is important. And on your handout, you don't need to look at it now, but when you go home, look at it. What we've done is give you the risk factors and the protective factors. So each one of these has both risk and protective factors, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward. Hello? One of the things about both Madame Calment and the people in the blue zones is they not only lived long lives, they had quality of life. And we decided when we were all fascinated, Roger and I started out with this fascination about the brain. And so that was our major focus. But after a while we started, why do we want to have healthy brains? I mean, it's great to have a healthy brain, but isn't there a larger purpose for doing this? And I think there is. What we decided, we started saying we want longevity, we want quality of life within the context of a long life. We not only want to live long, but we don't want an extra 20 or 30 years if we're going to be sick for an extra 20 or 30 years, or if we're going to have greater pain, or if we're going to be debilitated. What we would like is to be vital and engaged, continuing to learn, joining the village, coming and living in Concordia, doing exciting things, coming to things like this. So we truncated these two words into one, qualongevity. We made up the word, so we will use this as we go forward. What do we have next? I think this is a Cherokee legend. If there are any Cherokee here who know that this is not in fact a Cherokee legend, you can tell me this, but this is the way I heard it. The way this story goes is there is a village elder, and in some stories, some renditions, it's a man, some it's a woman. I had an experience when I was younger. I was working at a camp, and we rented the camp out to a Native American tribe in California. They were doing a tribal council, and it had rained the night before. And me and my other fellow young guys were trying to light a fire, and we just could not get that fire going. And an older woman from the tribe came over. She said, "Would you mind if I tried?" And we said, "No, please." And in about 3 seconds, she had a raise, it's like, she knew what she, so I picture her in in this legend. The idea is that she had lived a hard life. She was very old. She had seen trials and tribulations, but she had a great spirit. She was always happy. She was always helpful. People came to her for advice, and a young woman came to her and said, "How do you do this? How do you live so well?" And she said, "Well, the secret is that there are 2 packs of wolves that live inside of all of us, and they struggle for dominance. There's a pack of good wolves, and there's a pack of bad wolves. And every day of my life, I make sure that I'm feeding the good wolves and starving the bad wolves. And you got to keep doing it every day, because those bad wolves will come back if you don't starve them." This is a wonderful. How many of you have heard the term plasticity? That the brain is malleable. The brain is plastic, and this is one of the great revelations of neuroscience in the past 20 or so years. You used to think your brain was set, and you just was downhill from, like age 20 or 30 or something like that. Not true. Your brain is constantly changing. And it's a wonderful, this idea of feeding the good wolves, starving the bad wolves is perfect, because positive plasticity, what you're doing is making your brain stronger. Negative plasticity is when your brain damage comes in, when your brain is getting weaker. So part of the equation, it's fairly simple. Once you know how to do it, and you can look at the handout later, gives you some of the hints on what you need to be doing to feed the good wolves in your brain and starve the bad ones. What do we have?
And as you change your brain, because it will change, it changes moment by moment. And if you have negative thoughts, your brain will actually start wiring negatively. So it's feed the good and starve the bad. That's the theme of both your brain and actually your life. You can do that by dedicating your time. But this tells me it's time to explain what a brain break is. And our students know that a brain break is when your brain is trying to learn something, or you're trying to do something that's mentally taxing, and you're sitting for so long that your brain doesn't have enough heartbeats per minute because it's been stagnant. And pretty soon, be honest with me, in the last month has forgotten the last 3 pages of something that they were reading. It's because you read too long. Your brain is an electric light bulb that's really concentrating. You don't have enough blood flow. So everybody who wants to stand up, stretch, and if you don't want to stand up, at least put your arms up. Because by standing up or pulling up your arms and putting them down, technically you got more blood flow in your brain. It's a smidgen. As my dad used to say, a smidgen ain't much unless you do a smidgen every day. And then he said, holding up 7 fingers, and if you do 7 smidgens a week and 30 smidgens a month, you'll make a difference in this world. And that is something that guided me after he passed away. And he said, all this stuff on the brain you're doing, tell them a little bit makes a difference. If you do a little bit all the time, you did a little bit for me, sit down. Now what happens is your brain was a sponge that was full. And if I hadn't gotten more blood flow and distracted your attention from what Michael and I just said, you wouldn't remember the next several things as well. I want you to know you just squeezed out all the knowledge into, you'll get to it later, and you're ready with a fresh sponge. So we now have the next run. We're going to do brain breaks again. That's a technique that we use. And tonight, don't hesitate to stand up and sit down one time during a crummy commercial. You just did a favor for your brain to get a little more blood flow. And if you've got a relative or a friend who says, I can't do that because I have a walker or a wheelchair, then do this. Everybody do this with me. Raise your arm up. Pick an arm. Raise your arm up. Put it down. If I had enough money, every one of you could be tested, and I'd prove your brain just improved with just a smidgen more blood flow. And if you do 10 of those every night for the rest of your life, maybe it'll make a difference. And what if it doesn't? My dad used to say, it's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. So I'm sticking with that.